Today our topic of discussion is on hypertension. Hypertension is a very important topic. So first I shall be telling you what is hypertension, elevated blood pressure, stage 1 hypertension, stage 2 hypertension, the different types, classification, causes, pathophysiology, and ultimately we shall come to the treatment. Okay. So what is the normal blood pressure? It should be less than 120 by 80 millimeters of mercury. When do you say elevated blood pressure? Elevated blood pressure when the BP is between 120 to 129 and the diastolic is still in this range only, the normal, okay, that is less than 80. Okay, this is elevated blood pressure. If the BP becomes between 80 to 89, it comes the diastolic blood pressure, if it is between 80 to 89, it comes under the stage 1. Okay, so stage 1 is when the systolic blood pressure is between 130 to 139 millimeters of mercury, and the diastolic is between 80 to 89, right? And when do you say it is stage 2 hypertension? Stage 2 hypertension when the systolic is more than equal to 140 or the diastolic is more than equal to 90. Yeah, so these are the different stages of hypertension. Then let us come to the different classification. Okay, so before coming to the classification, there are some terms which is associated with this hypertension. That is white coat hypertension. Okay, so the previous classification which I told you about the categories of hypertension, what did I say you? That the normal should be less than 120 by 80. Okay, and the pre-elevated BP, that is between 120 to 129, and this should be still less than 80. Okay, stage 1 is 130 to 139, 80 to 89. Stage 4 is more than 140. Okay, and right, so this is more than 140, and the diastolic, that is going to be more than 90, more than equal to 90. See, this classification, this is according to the American Heart Association, AHA classification. Okay, there is one more classification according to the JNC classification, your Joint National Committee classification. So this classification is a little bit different from this classification. According to this classification, according to the your JNC 8 or the Joint National Committee classification, this is according to the JNC. So according to the JNC criteria, pre-hypertension, here what we say as elevated hypertension, this is the term which is used in the AHA, that is elevated hypertension. This is your stage 1, this is your stage 2. According to the JNC, what we call as elevated, they call it as pre-hypertension. Okay, pre-hypertension. Pre-hypertension, that is your 120 to 129, and the diastolic is going to be less than 80, pre-hypertension. Okay, and even in the JNC 8 criteria, they also consider this also as pre-hypertension, 130 to 139, 80 to 89. Understood? So what is considered as stage 1 in AHA guidelines, that is considered as, let me just mark this, both these two are coming under the pre-hypertension according to the JNC criteria. Okay, so you might ask, then according to JNC criteria, what will be the stage 1 hypertension? According to the JNC criteria, the stage 1 hypertension will be when the BP goes more than 140. Okay, so 140 to 159, 90 to 99 is the stage 1 hypertension, and the stage 2 hypertension is when the BP goes more than, it is more than equal to 160, or the diastolic, remember it is always or, not and. I'll just tell you what is this or and, or it is more than equal to 100. Okay, so even remember this thing which is there, this stage 1 hypertension, okay, and this pre-hypertension, all these are or. Now you might think, what is the difference between or and and? And means if it fulfills both the criteria, or means if at least it fulfills any one criteria, you will consider it under stage 1 hypertension. Similarly, like a patient's BP, suppose it has come somewhat, 170, but his diastolic is 80. Okay, so at least it is fulfilling the systolic criteria. So it will be classified under stage 2 hypertension. Or let us say a patient's, this upper one, this has come 130, but this diastolic has come to 100. Okay, then it will again come under stage 2. It is or any one of these criteria will be fulfilled, it will come under the stage 2 hypertension. Okay, so there is a little bit difference between this AHA and this JNC guidelines. So just look into this. Okay. Okay, next let us come to the different types of hypertension. There are some terms which is associated with the different types of hypertension. That is one which is called as white coat hypertension. White coat. Who wears a white coat? A doctor wears a white coat, isn't it? So this type of hypertension, you know, this patient, these individuals, when they will measure their BP at home, that they'll have a normal BP. But when they will come to the hospital, or when they will come to the physician's clinic, then there will be an increase in the BP. Okay, so there is a transient increase in the blood pressure of the normal individuals when the blood pressure is recorded in hospital settings. At home, when they will measure, they will have a normal BP. But when they will come in front of the doctor or in the hospital, suddenly their BP will increase. That is what is called as the white coat hypertension. Right, then there is another type of hypertension which is the reverse of white coat hypertension. That is, the individuals will have a normal BP when the patient will come to the doctor, but at home his BP will be elevated. That is what is called as the isolated ambulatory or masked hypertension. Masked hypertension. Okay, so this masked hypertension means the patient will have a normal BP. Okay, it's a reverse of this white coat. The patient will have a normal BP in clinic, but he will show a normal BP when the patient is in clinic, but the patient will show a elevated BP at home. In the home, when at home, when the blood pressure will be measured, they will be elevated. Okay. Then there is one more term which is called as paradoxical hypertension. Paradoxical hypertension means a patient who is taking the antihypertensive drugs, they show an increase in blood pressure. Like suppose a patient is taking beta blockers. Okay, the patient is taking beta blockers, or the patient is taking, you know, ACE inhibitors. The patient is, these are the different, you know, antihypertensive drugs. We'll discuss about it later. So even after taking these antihypertensive drugs, on the antihypertensive drugs, the patient is showing a rise in BP. Now, there are some reasons for this paradoxical hypertension. Paradoxical hypertension reasons you need to know. So actually what happens is paradoxical hypertension is often seen in patients who have got diabetes with hypertension. Why is it so? Because often this patient of diabetes, they develop hypoglycemia. Okay, suppose these patients, they are taking insulin, okay, and you know, they skipped a meal or they exercised a lot and they developed hypoglycemia. Then what happens when a patient develops hypoglycemia? There is sympathetic stimulation. This is, you all must be knowing, when a patient develops hypoglycemia, there occurs sympathetic stimulation, due to which the patient develops tremors and sweating and all those things. Okay, so because of this sympathetic stimulation, there occurs a rise in blood pressure. So this is one of the reasons. Okay, or maybe a patient has got a pheochromocytoma, you know, the tumor of the adrenal medulla. Okay, so patient has developed a pheochromocytoma and you have only given the patient beta blocker. Okay, so the betas are masked and now the alpha receptors, they will become hyperactive and there will be constriction of the blood vessels and there will be a rise in BP. So these are some reasons. If the patient has diabetes, he developed hypoglycemia, you know, there can be a rise in BP. Or a patient who was having pheochromocytoma, okay, you give the patient only beta blockers. So because of unopposed alpha action, the patient will develop a rise in BP. Right, so these are certain terms which you need to know. Next, let us come to the classification. See, the classification, it is mainly of two types, the primary and the secondary. See, the primary ones, okay, so usually you won't find an underlying cause. Okay, so most of them, they have got a positive family history. Okay, so you won't find any underlying cause in this, and this is only responsible for the majority of the cases. The secondary one, they account only 15% of the cases, and here you can find some underlying cause which is responsible for hypertension. Okay, so the primary ones, they usually have a family history. Okay, so these people, they have a family history, you know, they have someone of hypertension, parents, first degree relatives, second degree relatives. Okay, so family history, and there is no underlying cause, and secondary you can usually find the underlying cause. Okay, now let us see what causes. What are the, I told you that you can find some causes. Now what can be the causes for the secondary hypertension? Yes, there can be many causes. The main causes are usually the renal causes. Okay, like the patient can have glomerulonephritis, or the patient can have some cysts in the kidneys, polycystic kidney disease. Okay, or any stenosis of the renal artery. Okay, renal artery stenosis. So there can be different causes, renal causes. Okay, there can be glomerulonephritis, renal artery stenosis. There can be some collagen vascular diseases also. So these can be some renal causes. Or the patient is taking some medication. The patient is on some drugs, like the patient is taking alcohol, or the patient is taking OCPs, or the patient is taking some anabolic steroids, or the patient anabolic steroids. Okay, or the patient is taking corticosteroids, or the patient is taking some NSAIDs, COX-2 inhibitors, erythropoietin. Okay, so these are some of the drugs which can cause a rise in blood pressure if taken chronically over a long time. OCPs, steroids, NSAIDs, erythropoietin. Okay, then you have got your NSAIDs, COX-2 inhibitors, right? And what else can be the reason? Yes, endocrine causes also. Endocrine causes, or endocrine causes. Okay, so what can be the different endocrine causes? Which endocrine causes can lead to hypertension? Yes, it can be pheochromocytoma, the tumor in the adrenal medulla. If you do remember, what was pheochromocytoma? Pheochromocytoma, that was the tumor in the adrenal medulla. And why it was causing hypertension? Because it was causing, from the tumor there was release of these norepinephrine into the release of the sympathomimetic amines into the blood. Okay, and the release of the sympathomimetic amines into the blood was causing a rise in blood pressure, pheochromocytoma. Okay, then you have got this Cushing's syndrome. Cushing's syndrome, this is because of the excess intake of steroids, corticosteroids. Okay, those who are taking, usually the main cause is the excess exogenously, those who take corticosteroids, or maybe there is some adrenal tumor, okay, which has led to excessive production of the corticosteroids, which causes Cushing's syndrome. Okay, then you have got the Conn's syndrome. Then you have got your hyperparathyroidism. You got hyperthyroidism. Okay, so these are very simple. Thyroid, hyperthyroidism, adrenal hyperplasia. Okay, so if the adrenal hypertrophy, adrenal hyperplasia, that will produce more, this mineralocorticoids and corticosteroids. So these all are the different causes of your secondary hypertension. Okay, and in pregnant ladies also there is preeclampsia, eclampsia, they also cause hypertension. These are some secondary causes of hypertension. Clear? Okay, now there is one more thing which is called as isolated systolic hypertension. From the name only you can understand. What do you understand by isolated systolic hypertension? In this type of hypertension, only the systolic blood pressure will be raised. The diastolic is not going to be raised. Like the patient will come to, usually it is seen in the elderlies, it is mainly seen in the elderlies because of this atherosclerosis. Elderly people, they develop this oxidized LDL that gets deposited on these intima of the blood vessels. Okay, and this causes the stiffening, the hardening, the stiffening of these blood vessels. Okay, so that causes isolated systolic hypertension. Only the systolic component is raised. Like the patient will come to you with a BP of something 160 by 80. This is normal, but only this is raised. The systolic component is raised. So the most common cause of this isolated systolic hypertension is always atherosclerosis. Very common in the elderlies. Apart from this, there are many other reasons also, like you have got aortic regurgitation, coarctation of the aorta, the narrowing of the aorta, certain regions. Okay, so if there is some narrowing, the coarctation of the aorta. Then you have got thyrotoxicosis, excess amount of these thyroid hormones in circulation. Okay, thyroid toxicosis. Then you have got patent ductus arteriosus. These are some other causes, but the most common causes are atherosclerosis and aortic regurgitation. Thyrotoxicosis also you can see in patients. Okay. Next, let us see how are you going to measure the blood pressure. What is the method you are going to adopt for measuring the blood pressure. Ideally, although this ideal method is not followed in the clinics all the time, but you should follow it. Okay, so you should be knowing what is the ideal method of measuring the blood pressure. Remember, the blood pressure should be measured twice. First, the first thing is that it should be measured on 3 separate days. Just once you measure the blood pressure, you find it's high, don't say that the blood pressure is high. I'm talking about the ideal way of measuring. So first, it should be measured on 3 separate days, and each time you are measuring it, you should measure it twice. Twice means first the patient supine, okay, or seated, the patient, with the patient lying down or the patient in the sitting position, and second, the patient standing. Okay, and second, the patient standing. So in these two positions, you have to measure the BP of the patient, and at least for more than 2 minutes. Quickly you measure it and you find, okay, find this interpretation, quick interpretation of results. No, at least for more than equal to 2 minutes. Okay, and then you find out the average. Okay, so here how much BP you're getting, here you'll find a slight difference, or maybe you'll find the same. Okay, you will find the average, and that is your BP, okay, blood pressure, and that has to be done on 3 separate days. Okay, and the average of these measurements, not this average, this usually comes out to be same. This average 3 days measurements you are going to take, and the average of these 3 days measurements. Okay, so this I told you that this average of these 3 readings are taken. Okay, so BP should be measured, remember, in both the arms. Okay, so BP should be measured in, this is the ideal ways how you measure the BP. It should be measured in both the arms. And if you find that there is a difference of BP, okay, so if it is less than in the left, between the left arm and right arm, if you find that there is a difference in the BP, but if this difference is less than 10 millimeters of mercury, suppose you find that the BP is more in the right arm, the higher value is always taken. Okay, so if the BP in one arm is higher, the higher value is used. But if the difference is more than 10 millimeters of mercury, then you should look for like why the reason for this difference in BP. There are many reasons, like if there are some obstructive lesions in aorta, okay, or in the obstructive lesions in the subclavian artery, they are often caused for, if there is a difference of more than 10 millimeters of mercury between the two arms. Okay, so this is all about it. And you all know how to measure the systolic blood pressure and the diastolic blood pressure. The pressure at which the first beat is heard, okay, as the pressure falls, that is the systolic blood pressure. Okay, and the disappearance of those sounds in the phase 4 of the Korotkoff sounds, that you will see it in the practical, you can see it. Okay, so next let us look at the pathophysiology. Okay, so what is the reason for this hypertension? So the main pathophysiology, as you see, as I told you, the main cause of primary hypertension is genetic factors. Okay, genetic factors, there are multiple genes, it's multifactorial, multiple genes are involved in primary hypertension. So the first reason is your genetic. Okay, then you have got some environmental factors also, like several environmental factors, like those who excess of alcohol intake, smoking, those who have a very poor quality of sleep, okay, mental stress, or you are taking high sodium diet. So these can cause hypertension. Okay, what else? Yes, if there occurs any problem in the RAS, okay, so in the renin angiotensin aldosterone system, okay, so if there occurs any derangement in the sympathetic nervous system, okay, so these also cause hypertension. Okay, so how RAS, you all know that RAS, this renin angiotensin aldosterone, this aldosterone, okay, so this causes this sodium retention. Okay, so it causes vasoconstriction. Angiotensin, it causes vasoconstriction, causes sodium retention in the body. Okay, so by this it causes elevated hypertension. Okay, then you have got the different natriuretic peptides also, like you have got the ANP, okay, and the BNP. What do these natriuretic peptides do? From the name only you can understand, they help in the excretion of sodium. So if there occurs, these natriuretic peptides, they cause the excretion of sodium and they help in maintaining the sodium balance in our body. Okay, but if there occurs any derangement in this natriuretic peptides, it can also lead to, there is deficiency of these natriuretic peptides, it can lead to hypertension. Okay, next, let us see, there are some features of the endothelium, like you all must be knowing that endothelium, there is this nitric oxide. Okay, the endothelial cells, they produce nitric oxide, and nitric oxide causes the vasodilation of the endothelium. But due to any reason, due to any endothelial injury, okay, any inflammation, okay, so if there is reduced function of this nitric oxide, which decreases this vasodilation, okay, and it causes vasoconstriction of the endothelium. There occurs vasoconstriction, that is the constriction of these vessels, blood vessels. It can cause your hypertension. Okay, next I told you about the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, if the sympathetic activity that is if it becomes increased, okay, then it can, obviously, sympathetic nervous system, if it is increased, it will cause vasoconstriction and it will cause hypertension. So these are some of the different factors which can cause hypertension. Okay, then let us come to the clinical features. See, in the clinical features, most of the patient will come to you are mainly asymptomatic. Okay, so when usually you visit a physician, the first thing you must have seen, the physician tells you to take your weight, measure the blood pressure. So mainly on this routine examination only, we come to know, yes, this patient has the BP is elevated. Or sometimes, this patients can also come to you with headache. They'll say, I'm having headache, I'm having some sort of dizziness, okay, and I'm having polyuria. So when you see these things, you measure the BP and you find that the BP is elevated. And like if the patient had a hypertension for a long time, okay, and it was undetected, then you found out in the echocardiography, you found out, or in the ECG, you found out that the left ventricular hypertrophy, okay, or there can be left atrial hypertrophy, right? Or you'll find that the second heart sound has got two components, A2 and P2. You'll find that this A2 component of the second heart sound is increased, okay. Or during retinal examination, like if the patient had a long standing hypertension, it was undetected, you can also find some changes in the fundal examination, retinal examination, you will find fundal changes. So these are certain changes, certain clinical features which you get of hypertension. Okay, so this is the thing. And all right, so apart from it, you obviously, there are these are the main things. Next let us come to the complications of hypertension. Okay, so what can be the complications of hypertension? The most feared complication of hypertension, see, it can affect the CNS, okay, it can affect your eyes, that is, it can cause some ophthalmic complications, it can cause renal complications, it can cause cardiovascular complications. These four are very, very important. Should remember, it can affect these four systems. It can affect the CNS, it can affect your ophthalmic, renal, cardiovascular. In the CNS, what will you see? If the pressure suddenly increases, acute hypertension, that can lead to ischemic attacks, transient ischemic attacks. It can cause strokes. It can cause subarachnoid hemorrhage. Okay, it can cause hemorrhage. It can cause hypertensive encephalopathy. The BP goes very high, more than 220 by 120. It can cause hypertensive encephalopathy. So these are the different complications which occurs in the CNS. What about the ophthalmic complications? Now, there is a grading of this hypertensive retinopathy. Okay, so there is mainly the thickening of the retina. Okay, so the retina, the retinal arterioles. Okay, so the retinal arterioles, there is a thickening of the wall of the retinal arterioles. Okay, and as a result of which, obviously, if the walls get thickened, the lumen will be narrowed down. Okay, so there is narrowing of the blood columns, and there is a grading of this retinopathy. This hypertensive retinopathy is graded from 1 to 4. Okay, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4. In grade 1, just you can find these arteries have narrowed down. Okay, then in grade 2, you'll find that there is marked arterial narrowing. Okay, and grade 3, you will find the features of grade 2, plus you will also find hemorrhages. You'll find some flame-shaped hemorrhages in the retina. You'll find flame-shaped hemorrhages. Okay, flame-shaped hemorrhages, and you'll shaped. Okay, and hemorrhages, and you'll also find exudates, soft exudates. Okay, so here, grade 4, you will find hemorrhages, you will find exudates, plus you will also find papilledema. What do you understand by papilledema? Papilledema, it is a swelling of the optic disc. Okay, so when during the examination of the retina, you will find there is the swelling, okay, the optic disc swelling. Right, so this is about your ophthalmic complications. Next, come to the renal complications. Renal complications, the kidneys, they start getting affected. There is renal failure. Okay, there is progressive renal failure. You'll find protein in urine, proteinuria. So these are your renal complications. What about cardiovascular complications? See, cardiovascular complications, many things can happen here. That is, you can get, the angina, ischemic heart diseases, angina, myocardial infarction. Okay, so this can occur. There can occur hypertrophy of the muscles of the heart, like the ventricles, left ventricular hypertrophy. There can be left atrial hypertrophy. Because of this hypertrophy, the contraction of the heart, and also the diastolic function of the heart is also impaired. So this leads to heart failure. Okay, so there can be aortic dissection, there can be aortic aneurysm. Okay, so these are the different complications which you will face in the cardiovascular with hypertension. Okay, next come to malignant hypertension. What is malignant hypertension? What do you understand by malignant hypertension? Malignant hypertension, in this the patient will come to present to you with very high, markedly high, very high blood pressure. And then when you examine the retina, you can clearly see the retinal hemorrhages. Okay, so you can see the retinal hemorrhages and the exudates in the retina. And often the patient will present to you with, like, the patient will be having severe headache, vomiting, confusion. Okay, and there will be a worsening in the renal functions also. You will find all the CNS symptoms also. Patient is having confusion, headache, vomiting. Okay, so plus the renal functions also, you'll find a worsening of the renal functions. You'll find proteinuria, progressive renal failure. Okay, so, okay. Next, come to the investigations. Okay, so what are the investigations which we are going to do? So what are the basic investigations you're going to do in this patients? So obviously, as the patient comes to you, so first and foremost, we go for the urine, certain indications, certain blood tests also, I'll tell you. One urine analysis and certain blood tests also you're going to do in the patient. So in the urine, what are you going to see? Mainly for the presence of protein. Because if there has occurred renal failure, progressive renal failure, you'll find protein in urine, you'll find glucose in urine, you can find blood in urine. Okay, so look for this protein, glucose, blood in urine, or any pus cells and all. Okay, and what are you going to see in the blood? In the blood, you are going to look for urea, creatinine. Why? To assess the renal function. Okay, and there can be some secondary causes of hypertension also, like therefore you're going to look for the serum electrolytes. Mainly we are going to look for the potassium levels. Okay, we are going to look for the sodium levels, because often in this hyperaldosteronism, okay, and hypokalemia, okay, hypokalemia and alkalosis, this occurs in hyperaldosteronism. Okay, so therefore it's very important to see the electrolyte levels also. You find there is hypokalemia and you find there is alkalosis, you can suspect it in that it's a case of hyperaldosteronism. Okay, and what else? You have to look for the blood glucose levels. Okay, fasting blood glucose levels as well as the postprandial blood glucose levels to rule out for hyperglycemia. You're going to look for the serum cholesterol levels, LDL, triglyceride levels. What else? You're also going to look for the calcium levels, the uric acid levels. You're going to do the ECG. Why? To see whether the heart is also involved in or not. Okay, whether there is left ventricular hypertrophy. Okay, so if you find something positive in ECG, then we go for echo to see if any other cardiovascular complication has also occurred or not. So you look for the renal complications, you look for the blood test, you see the glucose levels, electrolyte levels, cholesterol levels, ECG, echo. So all these things you're also going to do. Okay, so these are the basic studies which you are going to do. Next, we'll go for some more advanced tests, studies. Why do we do this? To find out the secondary cause of hypertension, whether there is any secondary cause of hypertension. So I have already discussed with you what are the secondary causes of hypertension. If you do remember, that was your pheochromocytoma. Then it was your Cushing's syndrome. Then you have got your renal artery stenosis, polycystic renal disease, okay, acromegaly, others aldosteronism, just now I told you, hyperaldosteronism. So accordingly, these specific tests you are going to see. Pheochromocytoma, you are going to see the urinary catecholamine levels. Okay, in the urinary, there'll be increased catecholamine level. There'll be increased VMA levels. Okay, increased metanephrine levels. Okay, so you're going to look for these. If you find these are there, that means it is more in favor of pheochromocytoma. Cushing syndrome, what are you going to measure here? Cortisol levels. Okay, the plasma cortisol levels. You're going to look for the plasma cortisol levels. You're going to look for the urinary cortisol levels. Okay. Okay. Then renal artery stenosis. What are you going to do? Here you can go for the Doppler ultrasound. Okay, Doppler ultrasound. You can go for the CT imaging, MRI to see this renal artery stenosis is present or not. Polycystic renal disease. Simple USG ultrasonography will help show presence of cysts in the kidneys. Aldosteronism. Again, we have to look for the electrolyte levels. Okay, so if there is, hypokalemia, or if there is the high aldosterone levels, okay, so this will rule out, this will indicate towards aldosteronism. Okay, so coarctation of aorta, that you can see in the chest radiography. You will see rib notching, rib notching. You see the coarctation of aorta. Coarctation of aorta. Can go for chest x-rays. Okay, so these are some secondary, for the secondary causes, you can do these following tests. Okay, next come to the treatment. So what is the treatment which you are going to initiate in the patients? So usually for the patients of grade 1 stage 1 hypertension, if these patients don't have diabetes, okay, first we see the risk, how much risk, like we calculate the 10-year risk for cardiovascular disease. If this 10-year risk is less than, we calculate the 10-year risk of cardiovascular disease. If this risk is less than 10%, we usually don't start the patient immediately on drugs. We start the patient on lifestyle modifications for a period of at least 3 to 6 months. If still there is no improvement, then we can start the patient on antihypertensive drugs. Okay, but those patients with stage 2 hypertension, or who have got stage 1, plus there is more than 10% risk, 10-year, more than 10-year risk of cardiovascular disease is more than 10%. In this, both lifestyle modifications plus drugs has to be started. Okay, so this is the thing. So treatment of hypertension, we mainly classify it under 3 things. One is your general measures, your lifestyle modification, then is your drug therapy, and then we will talk about the secondary hypertension, the underlying cause, how to treat it. So let us just look at the general measures, which most of you know. What are the lifestyle modifications you should do? Obviously, tell the patient to exercise, control obesity. If the patient is obese, tell the patient to control obesity. Dietary intake. What dietary? So dietary modifications. What dietary modifications? Low sodium diet. Okay. Low sodium diet. How much low sodium? It should be less than 6 grams of salt. Okay, and other dietary modifications rich in fruit, vegetables. Okay, less less fats in diet. Okay, so and smoking, no smoking, and alcohol, moderate amount of alcohol, regular exercises. Okay, so these are the different general measures. And what about the antihypertensive drug treatment? So what are the main drugs which we give to the patient? First, I'm just writing down the names of the drugs. Then I'll tell you about them one by one. So the most common drugs which is used for the treatment of hypertension are your diuretics. Okay. So in the diuretics, you have got how many types of diuretics? Do you remember? What are the types of diuretics? Yes, you have got your loop diuretics. You have got thiazide diuretics. Okay, you have got your potassium sparing diuretics. And you have got your mineralocorticoid receptor antagonists. Mineralocorticoid receptor antagonists. Different types. Do you remember any loop diuretics? You have got loop diuretics like furosemide, bumetanide, thiazide diuretics like chlorothiazide, chlorothiazide, hydrochlorothiazide, chlorthalidone. Previously, in a previous pharmacology and all, you must have studied about these drugs. Potassium sparing diuretics. Okay, so you have got drugs like amiloride. Okay, so amiloride and triamterene. Then mineralocorticoid receptor antagonists, you have got drugs like spironolactone. Okay, so these are your different. Okay, so what other group of drugs you have? Okay, so you have got the beta blockers. Okay, so they are also used. In beta blockers, we mainly use the cardioselective ones. They are more preferred, like metoprolol, atenolol. Okay, so these drugs are more preferred. Metoprolol, atenolol, bisoprolol, nebivolol. Okay, then you have got the combined alpha plus beta blockers. They're the class of drugs. So we have got the combined alpha plus beta blockers. In this, you have got the drugs like carvedilol, labetalol. Okay, so labetalol. Okay, so you have got these drugs, right? Okay, what other group of drugs do we have here? Okay, so what did we discuss till now? We talked about the thiazides, about the diuretics, beta blockers, combined alpha plus beta blockers. And next we'll be talking about the ACE inhibitors. Okay, then we'll be talking about the ERBs. Okay, then we shall be talking about the calcium channel blockers. And then let us talk about this alpha blockers, direct vasodilators. Okay, so in ACE inhibitors, you have got all those drugs, if you do remember, ending with pril. Okay, so captopril, okay, lisinopril. Okay, then ARBs, you have got those drugs ending with sartan, like losartan, candesartan, irbesartan. Okay, calcium channel blockers, you have got these drugs, you know, like verapamil, diltiazem, nifedipine. It's expected that you do remember nifedipine, because in pharmacology, all these drugs have already been covered. Nifedipine, okay, so verapamil, diltiazem. Then you have got your alpha blockers, and these alpha blockers, we usually use the alpha 1 selective ones. That is, you have got the prazosin, you have got terazosin, direct vasodilators, you know, directly they are dilating the arteries. Because here we are talking about the drugs used in hypertension. So mainly we are talking about the arterial vasodilators. That is, you have got drugs like hydralazine, minoxidil. Okay, and there are some certain alpha 2 blockers also. Certain alpha 2 blockers are also used. Like you have got drugs like your clonidine. Okay, so, right. So these are the different drugs. Okay, I'm sorry. Clonidine is the alpha 2 agonist, centrally acting alpha 2 agonist, presynaptic receptor. Na? So it's a agonist, alpha 2 agonist, clonidine. Okay, so these are your different groups of drugs. So let us study a little bit one by one. Okay, so let us first start with the diuretics. So diuretics, remember the most common diuretic which is used for these hypertension patients is mainly the thiazide diuretics. Okay, loop diuretics, we use it in patients of like if they have this, very high blood pressure, hypertensive emergencies or urgencies, or where there is renal impairment. In those cases, we use the loop diuretics, but mainly we use the thiazide diuretics. Okay, so thiazide diuretics, where do they act? Which part of the nephron do they act? If you do remember, they act in the DCT. Okay, so your PCT, loop of Henle, DCT, they are going to act in the early, this part of in the early distal convoluted tubule, right? And what they are going to do, they are going to mainly block this. There is going to act on this sodium chloride. There is this co-transporter. It is going to block this. It is going to inhibit the sodium chloride co-transporter. Okay, so that the sodium reabsorption will not take place from this portion of the DCT, and more amount of sodium is going to come out in the urine. Okay, so what are some of the adverse effects of thiazide diuretics? That is, obviously, along with sodium, potassium also gets excreted. Therefore, there occurs hypokalemia. Okay, there occurs hypokalemia. There can occur alkalosis. Okay, there can also occur if lots amounts of sodium and water gets excreted. In case, it can lead to hypotension, postural hypotension. Okay, it can lead to rise in the uric acid levels, hyperuricemia, rise in the calcium levels. Okay, just some of the adverse effects of thiazide diuretics. Okay, just short, I'm telling you. Okay, then loop, again, I told you, it's not mainly thiazides are used. Loop are only used if there is any renal impairment. Okay, or if in cases of hypertensive urgencies, emergencies, where more amount of sodium excretion is required because they are more powerful as compared to thiazide. Loop diuretics are mainly used in if there is any edema, okay, if there is any fluid accumulation, if there is edema in the body, in those cases we mainly use loop diuretics. Thiazide is preferred for patients of hypertension. Okay, next come to the beta blockers. So uses of beta blockers, where are beta blockers used? Beta blockers, you know, apart from hypertension, it is used in many other situations also. Do you remember the uses of beta blockers? Yes, they can be used in angina, but not in Prinzmetal's angina. It can be used in AMI, that is acute myocardial infarction. It can be used in arrhythmias. It's also got some anti-arrhythmic properties also. It can be used in thyrotoxicosis. If you do remember, one of the drugs of thyrotoxicosis was also propranolol, although there were many other drugs which were used in thyrotoxicosis, but one of the drugs was propranolol also, okay? And anxiety, migraine prophylaxis. Okay, so there are many other uses of beta blockers also. And where do you don't give, what are the contraindications where do you don't give beta blockers? Patients of asthma, okay, so any respiratory problems, you know, asthma, COPD, or in severe heart failure, decompensated severe, remember mild to moderate we can give, but severe heart failure we don't give. In any heart block, because it will further accentuate it, okay, heart block we don't give. Peripheral vascular disease we don't give, because if the beta is blocked, alpha's action will become more dominant. Okay, so peripheral vascular disease we don't give. Diabetes mellitus we don't give. It will mask the symptoms of hypoglycemia. Okay, some of the contraindications, keep these in mind. You know, if the patient doesn't have these conditions, then you can give the beta blockers. So which beta blockers do you prefer to give in these patients of hypertension? See, you can give either propranolol or you can give these cardioselective ones. So we mainly prefer this cardioselective ones. Okay, metoprolol, atenolol. Okay, so right, so what they are going, how do you give them? You give them mainly metoprolol. Both of them are given orally. This is given 50 mg, you know, twice daily. You can give also, you can increase the dose to 100 mg also. Okay, and sustained release tablets are also available. And why do we prefer giving the cardioselective ones? Because cardioselective ones, they have got less effect on this respiratory, this thing. You know, you can also give it in patients of COPD, because cardioselective ones are mainly blocking the beta 1. They don't have action on the beta 2 receptors. Beta 2 receptors are mainly present in the lungs and these airway passages and all. Okay, so therefore you can give them in patients of asthma or in case of patients of COPD. Right? Anyhow, these drugs you should still not give in patients of heart failure or heart block, but still you can give them in patients of PVD also. Right? So that is the thing. And what are the side effects? Side effects, sometimes it can cause bradycardia. You know, it will further decrease your heart rate. It will cause bradycardia. It can cause cardiac failure, bronchospasm. Okay, so bronchospasm is less with these cardioselective beta blockers. Okay. So then we talked about the beta blockers. Then you have got this alpha plus beta blockers. They block both the alpha and beta receptors. That is, you have got your labetalol and carvedilol. So these drugs are also used. Then you have got a group of drug which almost is prescribed in maximum of the patients. That is the ACE inhibitors. Okay, ACE inhibitors, since they are inhibiting the conversion of angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2, this conversion is inhibited by the ACE inhibitors. Here is the action of the ACE enzyme, and this ACE inhibitor is blocking, it's inhibiting this ACE inhibitors, okay? Now, blocking the action of ACE, this enzyme. So this angiotensin 2 is not formed, and you know this angiotensin 2 is responsible for vasoconstriction, for stimulation of the production of aldosterone. There is sodium retention and all. So these things are not occurring because angiotensin 2 is only not formed. So obviously this ACE inhibitors, they are very powerful, the dilators. They dilate both the arteries as well as veins, okay? And they also reduce the aldosterone release, because this angiotensin 2 only was working as a trigger for inducing the aldosterone release. So if angiotensin 2 is only not formed, so the vessels will also dilate, the aldosterone release will also not take place. Okay, so here we usually start with a small dose. We start with a small dose, like we start with captopril. Remember all the pills I told you. First, you usually start with a small dose and gradually you keep on increasing the dose. In simple example, like captopril, we give 6.25 mg and gradually we increase the dose. Side effects are there, can lead to postural hypotension. Suddenly, the patient, when the patient, after sitting, the patient suddenly stands up, suddenly the BP might go down, he might have dizziness and he might also fall down, okay? There can be dry cough, or there can be some hypersensitivity rashes, hypersensitivity reaction, like he can have rashes or blood dyscrasias. So this dry cough is very common with ACE inhibitors. If the patients develop dry cough and if you find that it's too much, like the patient is not able to tolerate it, we usually switch the patients to ARBs. ARBs, what they do? In ARBs, there is the conversion of angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. But this angiotensin 2, the receptors on which this angiotensin 2 will act, this AT1 receptors, the receptors of angiotensin 2, they are going to block these receptors. Okay, they are simply going to block these receptors. So if the receptors are blocked, angiotensin 2 doesn't have a receptor to act on. Okay, so indirectly the actions of angiotensin 2 will also not take place, just like this. That is the vasoconstriction, aldosterone release, and sodium retention. Those things will not occur. Okay, so ARBs, ultimately the same thing, only here the angiotensin 2 is not formed. Here it is formed. With ARBs it is formed, but they are not having, the receptors are blocked, right? So here the advantage of these ARBs is that this patient, you won't have this dry cough. Okay, right? Yes. Angiotensin receptor blockers. Okay, so the examples of different ARBs, if you do remember, all the sartans, losartan, candesartan, valsartan, okay, and they are better tolerated as compared to the ACE inhibitors. Okay, then next come to the so remember, these ACE inhibitors and ARBs are very good drugs. Like if the patient has got hypertension, along with hypertension, like if the patient has also got diabetes, okay, so and he has also started developing some kidney problems due to diabetes or due to hypertension, diabetic nephropathy. So in this ACE inhibitors and ARBs, they can also help to reverse this diabetic nephropathy also. So usually if a patient has hypertension with diabetes, we always prefer to give these drugs to the patient. Clear? Okay, next come to the vasodilators. Okay, so vasodilators, how do they act? They act by dilating the arteries and the veins. Okay, they dilate the arteries and they dilate the veins. Okay, and here we are mainly talking about the arteriolar vasodilators, okay, because we need to reduce the blood pressure. So mainly in this, we have got drugs like hydralazine, minoxidil, or we can use even those drugs which will cause both, both it will act on arteries and veins. Example of such drugs is sodium nitroprusside. Okay, next come to the calcium channel blockers. Calcium channel blockers, what is the mechanism of action of calcium channel blockers? They are directly going to act on the cell membrane. Okay, they are going to block the access of calcium channel blockers. They're blocking this calcium channels. Okay, and the entry of calcium into the cells is blocked. And thereby the cells will not contract. Calcium is required for the contraction, for the inotropic action. So they will reduce the contractility of the cells. Okay. So this is how they are going to work, and they increase the myocardium. Obviously, the contraction is decreasing, the work of the heart that is decreasing. Okay, they will increase the oxygen supply, they will increase the coronary blood flow, and they will reduce the vascular resistance also. They will reduce the vascular resistance. So there are different drugs, like you have got your nifedipine. Then you have got verapamil. Mainly nifedipine, the short-acting ones are not used. The sustained release ones are used, because short-acting ones, suddenly what they do, they cause a vasodilation and there is a drop in blood pressure, sudden drop in blood pressure, and that causes a reflex sympathetic release. Okay, that again causes tachycardia. So sometimes patients after giving nifedipine, because of this sudden, short act, very acute, within a few minutes, these blood vessels will dilate, the pressure will drop, and reflex, there will be sympathetic activity because of this fall in blood pressure. Often like myocardial infarction and angina also gets precipitated. So if you are using nifedipine, always use the sustained release form. Slowly, these vessels will dilate. Whatever will happen, it will happen gradually, so that there will not be this sudden, reflex sympathetic release. Okay. Okay. Next, come to the centrally acting drugs. Centrally acting drugs, you have got drugs like clonidine. Okay, so this acts centrally. They act as an agonist on the alpha-2 receptors. Alpha-2, they are the presynaptic receptors. Okay, and this is usually given twice to thrice daily, 250 mg twice to thrice daily. Then you have got alpha-methyl dopa. This is the drug of choice in pregnancy. Okay, so if a patient develops BP, high blood pressure in pregnancy, hypertension in pregnancy, we give the patient alpha-methyl dopa. Okay, so this is also a centrally acting drug. Okay, so this is all about it. So this is, I told you about the different drugs. Next is, how are you going to include, like which drug to give in which patient? This is the most common question which is asked. Okay, so, okay. Okay, so let us see, if remember one thing, if the patient has got a chronic kidney disease, okay, and hypertension, okay, or if the patient has got diabetic nephropathy and hypertension, matlab, these were the pre-existing problems. Along with that, the patient has developed hypertension. In these cases, we always prefer to start with the ACE inhibitor. Okay, so we, whatever, if anything else also you are including in it, prefer always to start with the ACE inhibitor. Okay. Or if a patient has developed hypertension, plus he has a history of myocardial infarction also, post myocardial infarction, or his left ventricular function, the ejection fraction, the ejection fraction, left ventricular ejection fraction, or the left ventricular function that is decreased. In these cases, we prefer giving them beta blockers. Okay. Okay. And what else? So this is mainly the thing. Okay. So like in young patients, remember, we mainly prefer the ACE inhibitors. Young patients, we prefer ACE inhibitors, ARBs. Whereas in elderlies, we mainly prefer the thiazide diuretics. Elderlies, we prefer the thiazide diuretics. Okay. Okay. Next, okay. Next, what do you understand by resistant hypertension? Resistant hypertension. And what is the treatment of resistant hypertension? See, in the patients of resistant hypertension, these patients have a BP of at least 140/90, despite treatment with the maximum dose of antihypertensive drugs. Like even you are giving 3 or more antihypertensive drugs, but even after giving 3 or more hypertensive drugs, the blood pressure is at least 140/90 or even more than this. Okay, so more than equal to either 140/90 or more than 140/90. This is what is called as resistant hypertension. Resistant hypertension. Okay. So this is very important. Next, there is one more term which is called as hypertensive encephalopathy. We will just discuss briefly about this hypertensive encephalopathy and the treatment. Hypertensive encephalopathy, this is what happens in hypertensive encephalopathy. From the name only you can understand, it is mainly going to affect the CNS, the CNS complication. It's a CNS complication. The patient presents to you with very high blood pressure, okay, so maybe above 220/120, very high blood pressure, and the patient will have all types of neurological disturbances. Okay, all types of neurological disturbances, like the patient will have there'll be confusion, and the patient suddenly he'll not be able to speak, or he'll not be able to see. There'll be a transient abnormality in speech. You'll see that his speech is getting deranged, or his vision, there is some transient abnormalities in his vision, or suddenly some part of his body there is numbness and there is weakness. Okay, so there is paresthesias. Okay, there is disorientation, the patient is getting confused, there is loss of consciousness. Okay, and when you examine the retina, you'll see there is swelling of the optic disc also, papilledema. Okay, so these are the different, this is what, how you say it's a hepatic encephalopathy. Okay, so what about this neurological deficit which has occurred? Is it permanent? No. If you effectively control the hypertension, once this hypertension is reversed, okay, the encephalopathy, these features, these neurological deficits will also go away. Okay, so what is the treatment in this such, because very, it's emergency situation. What will you do? Obviously, you will start giving treatment to the patient, okay, to lower the BP, but will you just lower the BP all of a sudden? Like, will you do a sudden rapid lowering of BP? No. Okay, so first your aim should be, you will try whatever is it BP, whatever is this, initial BP, whatever he has presented to you, maybe 220 with 1/120, 10 to 20% of this BP. Okay, so you will reduce in the first hour. And be very careful, you have to be very gradually, you have to lower. Okay, so around 25%. Gradual, this is very important. Gradual lowering, often it is asked in vivas that will you suddenly lower the BP, such high BP you will try to make it as soon as possible 120/80, or will you gradually, slowly you will lower his BP. This is very important. Gradual lowering of BP is very much important. Okay, so gradual lowering of BP, now around 25% lowering, you do it in 6 hours, slowly over the next 6 hours, go slow. Because if you cause too rapid lowering of BP, suddenly there will be cerebral ischemia. Okay, there will be blindness, there will be myocardial infarction. Okay, many other complications will come in. Right, so which drug do you prefer in these situations? Obviously, you'll go for some IV drug only, this emergency condition. We go for sodium nitroprusside. So this is the most effective drug in patients of hypertensive encephalopathy. Okay, so, or you can go for labetalol, parenteral labetalol. This is also a good drug, or nitroglycerine. But remember, in these situations, you should never use nifedipine. Okay, nifedipine, because as I told you in the just previous only, they are very short acting, and they cause a sudden fall in BP, and there is a reflex sympathetic increase in the sympathetic activity, and it can precipitate angina and myocardial infarction. So just write, this is the drug of choice in hypertensive encephalopathy. You can also give parenteral labetalol. This situation is an emergency situation. Don't wait, don't give drugs orally and wait for it. You have to give parenterally, but very carefully you have to monitor it, that slowly, gradually you have to reduce the blood pressure. Clear? Okay. Next, we'll talk about the hypertensive emergencies, and this will be the last portion of our today's lecture. That is, what do you understand by hypertensive emergency? See, hypertensive emergency, this means a blood pressure, a BP, which is the systolic is usually more than 180 mm of mercury. This is what is called as hypertensive emergencies. Okay, so hypertensive emergencies, the patient can present to you just with this high BP. There can be, or there may be, or there may not be signs of acute target organ damage. Like sometimes what happens along with this in the emergency, urgency and emergency, there are two things which is there. So remember, in this emergency, the patient usually presents with high BP. Emergency, in this emergency situation, when someone is saying hypertensive emergency, means the BP is more than 180, plus there are signs of target end organ damage. Sub organ damage. Which organ damage? I'll just tell you. Target end organ damage. Like, for example, just now I told you hypertensive encephalopathy, it has affected the CNS, okay, or acute heart failure. It has affected the cardiovascular system, acute heart failure. There is pulmonary edema also, okay, or there is acute renal failure, okay, or there is myocardial infarction, or there is angina. Okay, there is some organ, one or other of the organ is affected, or and also. Okay, so some of the other organ is affected, or the patient has come to you with stroke, or any hemorrhagic stroke or ischemic stroke. Okay, so the patient presents to you with a high BP plus any one of the organ damage or one or more organ damage. Okay, so this is what is emergency. And in urgency, the hypertensive urgency, yes, the patient has a high, severe increase in blood pressure, more than 180, but there is no target organ damage. There is no target organ damage. This is the main difference, often asked in Viva. What is the difference between emergency and urgency? The emergency means it's an emergency situation. Okay, so there is some target organ damage. Urgency means, yes, there is an urgency, but it is not an emergency. Okay, so it the BP is more than 180, but there is no target organ damage. Clear? So this is okay. Next, let us look at the drugs which are used for the treatment of this hypertensive emergency. Okay, so out of all the drugs we have discussed, there are certain drugs which are suited, like which we mainly use for this hypertensive emergencies. So first is this labetalol. Which group of drug it was? It was a combined, it was a alpha plus beta blocker. Okay, so all these drugs which I'm going to write it down, these all are given by the parenteral route. Esmolol is a beta blocker. It's ultra short acting beta blocker. Okay, then you have got this nicardipine. This is a calcium channel blocker. Then you have got this nitroglycerine. Okay, it's the vasodilator. Then you have got nitroprusside, sodium nitroprusside, both arterial as well as venous dilator. Okay. Then you have got this enalaprilat, which is your ACE inhibitor. Enalapril also you can write. Okay. So labetalol, all these are given by IV route only. If you want to know the dose, remember, so all of them, they are given by a bolus dose. Like first it is given 20 mg IV. It is given every 2 minutes. Okay, so and okay, so or you can give it. It is given 20 milligrams IV every 2 minutes, or you can just increase the dose a little bit. 40 to 80 mg IV you can give every 10 to 20 minutes. Total 300 mg. Okay, esmolol, that is also given at a dose of 200 to 500 micrograms per kg over 1 to 3 minutes. Okay, first this bolus dose is given, then it is given at a rate of 50 micrograms per minute. Okay, so then nicardipine, this is given at a rate of 5 mg per hour. Okay, there is some other changes also, like you can increase it by 2.5 mg every hour. Nitroglycerine, you start it at 5 micrograms per minute, and then you can increase it by 5 to 10 micrograms okay, per minute every 3 to 5 minutes. Nitroprusside, this is given at a dose of 0.3 to 0.5 micrograms per kg per minute. And again, same way, you can increase it by this much only every 3 to 5 minutes. Okay. Enalapril, this is given 1.25 mg over 5 minutes IV every 4 to 6 hours. At least 1 or 2 you remember the doses. Okay. Okay, so these are the drugs which is mainly used, labetalol, esmolol, nicardipine, nitroglycerine, nitroprusside, enalaprilat. Okay, so next, just a last portion, that is, I'll just tell you, in certain situations, there are certain drugs of choice is there out of all these drugs. Like if the patient has come to you with a raised BP, plus this patient has also developed acute aortic dissection. Patient has come to you with a raised BP and the patient has developed acute pulmonary edema. Again, hypertension with acute coronary syndrome, hypertension with acute renal failure, hypertension with hepatic encephalopathy, hypertension, okay, hypertension with subarachnoid hemorrhage, intracerebral hemorrhage, acute ischemic stroke, pheochromocytoma, eclampsia. So what are the drug of choice? Acute aortic dissection. Here we mainly suggest, okay, so we mainly prefer giving labetalol, or you can give esmolol, or you can give sodium nitroprusside. Pulmonary edema, in pulmonary edema, since we need some vasodilatory effect also, isn't it? In pulmonary edema, we also need some vasodilatory effect. So we use some vasodilators as drugs of first choice. That is, we can use nitroglycerine. So you can use nitroprusside, sodium nitroprusside, or you can use enalapril. Okay, in ACS patients, again, you need some drug which is going to dilate the blood vessels. Okay, so here also you can use nitroglycerine or you can use beta blockers. Beta blockers, they have also got cardioprotective effect. Okay, beta blockers. Acute renal failure, in this we again prefer labetalol or nicardipine. Hypertensive encephalopathy, what was the drug I had told you? Again, labetalol. I discussed about this hypertensive encephalopathy. Labetalol or the vasodilators also you can use, like hydralazine, nitroglycerine. Okay, so those drugs also you can use. Subarachnoid hemorrhage. In subarachnoid hemorrhage, again labetalol. You can see maximum we prefer labetalol only. Labetalol, or you can give esmolol. Intracerebral hemorrhage, again all these hemorrhage patients we mainly prefer this labetalol or esmolol. Acute ischemic stroke. Okay, so in the stroke patients, again we prefer labetalol. All these by the IV route, okay, infusion, labetalol infusion, or you can give the nitroglycerine infusion. This is acute ischemic stroke. Okay. Then talking about the pheochromocytoma. Pheochromocytoma should never give the beta blockers. Okay. Pure beta blockers you should not give in these patients. Otherwise, the alpha receptors will become, more dominant and the BP will go even more higher. Okay. So in these patients, we prefer the calcium channel blockers. We can give nicardipine or we can give phentolamine. Eclampsia, what are you going to give? The drugs which is safe in pregnancy. Which drugs are safe in pregnancy? No, alpha methyl dopa is given for normal hypertension in pregnancy. In eclampsia, in this condition, we give hydralazine. Hydralazine is safe in pregnancy. It's a vasodilator, safe in pregnancy. Or you can give labetalol. This is also safe in pregnancy. This you remember, because in eclampsia you can't give any other drug. Okay, so hydralazine, labetalol, nicardipine, only those drugs which are safe in pregnancy you can give them. Okay, so these are the different conditions, certain conditions in which certain drugs are preferred. Okay, so as you can see, maximum cases we are giving labetalol. Acute pulmonary edema, ACS patients. Okay, so and this renal failure patients, acute pulmonary edema and ACS patients, we prefer the vasodilators. Okay, so like nitroglycerine and all. Okay, and maximum others we have always put the labetalol only. Okay, so this is all about your treatment of hypertensive emergencies. So I hope so it's clear to you what is hypertension. Okay, so the categories of hypertension, the classification, pathophysiology, the different terms I told you, some terms related with hypertension, the treatment. Okay, so and the treatment, what is hypertensive encephalopathy, and the treatment of hypertensive emergencies. So if a question comes on hypertensive emergencies, write very clearly what is the blood pressure above which you say it's hypertensive emergency. When do you say it emergency? When do you say it urgency? What are the drugs used? And if you can remember, at least say these conditions, okay, these target end organ damage which is taking place, and which condition you will prefer which drug. Okay, so that will fetch you good marks, right? So this is all about it.